Bienvenue, bonjour tout le monde. Thank you everyone for coming to the 34th event of Disrupting Disruptions, the Feminist and Accessible Publishing, Communications, and Technologies Practices Speaker and Workshop Series. I'm Dr. Alex Ketchum, and I'm a professor of feminist and social justice studies at McGill and the organizer of this series. The Feminist and Accessible Publishing, Communications, and Technologies Practices Speaker and Workshop Series seeks to bring together scholars, creators, and people in industry working at the intersections of digital humanities, computer science, feminist studies, disability studies, communication studies, LGBTQ studies, history, and critical race theory. We are hosting 12 free virtual and professionally captioned events this winter, and you're welcome to join us at all of them. You can find our full schedule as well as video recordings of past events at disruptingdisruptions.com. That's the redirect URL. It's a lot snappier than the full URL. You can find our list of sponsors there as well, including SSHRC, the IGSF, Milieu, and the Indigenous Futures Lab. Next Wednesday, Anna Brandushku will be speaking about funding AI in Canada, public investments, private interests at 7 p.m. And on March 3rd, Keone Mahalona and Peter Lucas-Jones will be speaking about Indigenous data sovereignty. Past series speakers, Suzanne Kite and Jess McLean, have pointed to the physical and material impacts of the digital world. While the events this semester are virtual, everything that we do is tied to the land and the space that we are on. Furthermore, as the series seeks to draw attention to power relations that have been invisibilized, it is important to acknowledge Canada's long colonial history and current political practices. The series is affiliated with the Institute for Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies of McGill University. We are currently located in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory. Furthermore, the ongoing organizing efforts by the Wet'suwet'en people at the Unistoten camp make clear the ever-present and ongoing colonial violence in Canada. Interwoven with this history of colonization is one of enslavement and racism. This university's namesake, James McGill, enslaved Black and Indigenous peoples. It was in part from the money he acquired through these violent acts that McGill University was founded. These histories are here with us in this space and inform the conversations we have today. I encourage you to learn about the lands that you are on. Nativeland.ca is a fantastic resource. And I think it's also important that we're aware of the spaces that the servers are on that power our ability to do these events in a virtual space. For this event, recording is enabled, so the event can be embedded on our website. Don't worry, only speakers will be shown in the video. We also have a Q&A option available, so throughout the talk, you may type your questions in the Q&A answer box, and there will be some time at the end for Chancey to answer them. We can't guarantee that every question will be answered, but we are grateful to the discussion that you generate. Now for today's event. I now have the pleasure of introducing Chancey Fleet. Chancey Fleet is a 2018 to 2019 Data and Society Fellow and current affiliate in residence, whose writing, organizing, and advocacy aims to catalyze critical inquiry into how cloud-connected accessibility tools benefit and harm, empower and expose communities of disability. Chancey is the Assistive Technology Coordinator at the New York Public Library, where she founded and maintains the Dimensions Project, a free open lab for the exploration and creation of accessible images, models, and data representations through tactile graphics, 3D models, and non-visual approaches to coding, CAD, and visual arts. Chancey was recognized as a 2017 Library Journal Mover and Shaker. So thank you, Chancey, so much for being here with us, and thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name's Chancey, and I am going to be talking to you tonight about digital frictions and dark patterns in accessible technology. My contact information is here. You can reach me on Twitter at Chancey Fleet. If you're hearing me and not seeing me, that's CHANCEY, F as in father, LEET. You can also reach me at chancey@datasociety.net. I'm an affiliate in residence at the Data and Society Research Institute. And just to do a quick access check, people who are blind or visually impaired may not be able to access slide decks that are embedded inside Zoom. So if you'd like your own copy of the slide deck in an accessible format, you can email the organizers or email me, and we'd be happy to furnish that. Before I move on to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about my identity and how I'm situated in the work that I do. I identify as blind, and I feel so strongly about this that I recently started capitalizing it because I noticed that journalists and other folks had a tendency to correct it to something else, perhaps visually impaired, disabled, low vision. But I identify as blind. To me, blindness does not connote absence. To be blind connotes drawing from a rich community of practice, drawing wisdom from the people that are on my journey with me today and the wisdom of the generations that came before us. It means relating to the world in a way that does not prioritize vision, but prioritizes touch, sound, acoustic awareness, kinesthetic awareness, problem solving, description, and communication. So that's my identity. Everything that I do springs from that identity. I'm also grounded in my practice as a library-based technology educator, working with folks who have all kinds of intersectional identities that affect the way that they participate, perceive, and think about joining in the digital commons. So my objective tonight, this evening, is to talk to you about some digital frictions that come between blind and disabled people and our effective use of digital spaces and amenities. I want to introduce a gray area or introduce some remapping of what is a digital friction and what is a dark pattern. And I want to invite us all to imagine a future where friction is reduced and dark patterns are allowed to see the light. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So I want to set some kind of baseline truths, since most of you aren't coming from the accessible technology world, about blind and disabled people living in the digital commons. And let me first say that I'll often say blind and disabled, and some of my examples tonight will apply to people that have other disabilities. But blindness is what I know. And in my practice at the library, most of the folks I serve are blind, visually impaired, or specifically have print-related disabilities. I can't speak for all blind people's experience, and even more so, I can't speak for the experience of every disabled person. So read widely, listen widely, engage widely in the community. I have to offer a few thoughts. Please corroborate them in our communities of disability. And please find areas where my ideas conflict with the ideas of other people who have disabilities. But I'm going to do the best I can to represent a corner of the disability experience as I see it and observe it. So it's 2020, 2021, thank goodness. Blind and disabled people can generally use assistive technologies to access the web and mobile ecosystem. For example, blind people use screen readers. Screen readers are pre-installed or third-party software that selectively and efficiently can read things out loud or can send things to a braille display. These are built into Android in the form of TalkBack and other screen readers, iOS and Mac in the form of VoiceOver, and Windows in the form of Narrator built in, and there are some other more popular screen readers called NVDA and JAWS. Blind folks generally can use screen readers to get things done on the web and the mobile web, with some caveats that we'll get to in a little while. Folks that are visually impaired or may identify as blind but have some usable vision use magnification. Again, magnification is available built in across pretty much every operating system, and there are more powerful magnification programs, third-party programs that one can add. Magnification makes things bigger, but it doesn't stop there. Most magnification tools also allow you to customize color, contrast, font size, the font variant, and the size, shape, and border of the cursor and the mouse, among other things. Modern magnification systems are pretty sophisticated and even allow you to choose between full screen magnification, split view, or an overlay that shows a constant pan of a magnified view of where your mouse or pointer is going. People who have fine motor impairments and may not be able to interact with a traditional keyboard or a traditional mouse can often use voice control. Voice control allows dictation, but it goes much further than what Siri can do. Voice control lets you interact in full with your operating system. To varying degrees, Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android do allow voice control. Switch control is another option for folks that might have fine motor impairment and prefer not to use their voices. Switch control uses eye gaze or an array of buttons, maybe one button, maybe more, or hand or head movements to control focus and allow individuals to select things in the operating system to get things done. Again, these are available across most of our major operating systems. The basics are built in, more powerful tools can be bought. When people with sensory impairments access multimedia content, it's possible for videos to be captioned for people who are deaf and videos to be described for people who are blind, but that's not always the default. That doesn't always happen. But all of these technologies are well understood in the development community and are fairly widely available. And we're going to head to the next slide. Everyone in the world experiences frictions in relation to technology, but people with disabilities experience a disproportionate amount. I define digital frictions as circumstances that discourage, frustrate, slow, or stop a user from effectively using a tool or achieving a goal. These don't arise because of disability alone. Having a disability in the absence of tools around you does not cause friction. We looked at the social model of disability to realize that frictions arise when there is a mismatch between a user's abilities, what they're able to move, perceive, and do, their strengths, what they do best, what aptitudes they may have, preferences, the way that they wish to receive information, and the exposures that they're comfortable with, and knowledge, prior experience, cultural knowledge, contextual knowledge, and the affordances of a hardware or a software tool. We'll head to the next slide. So one friction that impacts people with disabilities disproportionately is the set of frictions of intersectionality. Information literacy and the ability to afford technology, of course, impacts our use of technology. I want to share that 70%, over 70% of blind people are unemployed or underemployed, one of the highest statistically underemployed or unemployed groups in the country. And I speak for the US. That's where I am right now. Compared to non-disabled people, disabled people are more than twice as likely in the US to live in poverty. Many disabled people receive a substandard education. And 15.7% of blind people have a bachelor's degree compared to 36% of the general population. Educational attainment, employment, and income all impact our ability to afford technology and to build information literacy skills. So basically, if you're underemployed or underemployed, that may mean that you're not able to afford a computer. That may mean that you're not able to afford the latest phone or tablet. Assistive technology tends to be more expensive than technology in the mainstream, particularly if you want to use the more powerful third-party tools. If you need something like switch control or like a braille display like I have, you may have to spend thousands of dollars. So I want to acknowledge my privilege in having kind of the latest state-of-the-art technology that I need to compete in terms of equality, and also to say that blind folks and folks with disabilities may encounter higher barriers to affording and using technology because of these intersectional frictions. Next slide. One of the most inescapable frictions, though, that we face is what I call friction caused by otherness. Blindness is a very low incidence disability. and so are disabilities that cause people to need things like voice control and switch control. Think about the way that you learn technology. Maybe you unbox a new video game or a new tablet on a holiday, and your family gathers around and shows you how to use it. Maybe you have parents that are aging in place, and when you go home, you show your parents how to set up their email and how to take photos and do the other things that they want to do. When you arrive at a new job, hopefully you get an orientation that includes how to use all the web tools that you need for that job. And everyone is basically interacting with technology in the same way when those informal, supportive transactions happen. For disabled and blind people, I'll speak to blind people in particular, our friends, coworkers, and families don't use technology the way that we do. And moving through the world, when the basic everyday technology we use is unfamiliar to other people, creates a powerful illusion for all involved that assistive technology is inherently difficult and slow to use. If I go to a Best Buy store and I'm trying to pick up the phone that's right for me, I can't ask someone at that store which phone, which tablet has the best screen reader. I probably can't even ask about magnification, and I definitely can't ask about switch control. If I call a mainstream customer service number or embark on an online chat, and I mention that I'm using a screen reader, it's unlikely that the person on the other end who's a frontline worker is going to be trained on exactly what that is and what that does. Being surrounded by people who consider your use of assistive technology as outside the norm creates genuine barriers to problem solving and learning. This can lead to attrition, folks giving up on learning their assistive technology, and it can also result in folks connecting to our disabled community of practice and building their own systems for troubleshooting and problem solving. That's what I've done, and that's why I'm in the technology industry, but it's not always easy for folks who aren't already connected to disability activism to get connected to those circles. Let's consider in particular the impact of video tutorial culture, which is centered on the presumption and privilege of vision. Almost anything you'd want to know right now, you can look up on YouTube. I like to study origami videos, but the majority of those are just someone's hands moving and creating a model while music plays in the background. There's no narrative there. There's no description there. Similar things happen when we learn software. Lots of screenshots, lots of pointing and clicking, not a lot of explication. Alternatives to this visual culture do exist. For example, you can check out youdescribe.org, which lets anyone create a descriptive track to accompany any YouTube video. The descriptive track adds a narrative and allows a person to voice their own description to fill in the blanks of what's unsaid in the visual video alone. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to raise a question. What is a digital friction and what is a dark pattern? We've talked about the definition of digital frictions. Now, dark patterns are traditionally defined as interfaces that are deliberately crafted to trick, corral, or redirect a user. We think of dark patterns as patterns that are deliberately engineered. I would suggest that when interfaces corral disabled users into a subprime experience, as I'm about to talk about, or they elevate the exposure of our data without meaningful consent, or when they actively exclude us, those should be considered dark patterns because we should be looking at impact on the user, not solely intent. Often these patterns are encoded in software or procedure without a clear malicious intent. But intent doesn't change the impact of a pattern that's been enacted on a user. So we're going to get into some examples now. If we could head to the next slide. So I want to talk about the accessibility of subsidized mobile phones. So many of you may be familiar with the Lifeline program, or maybe not. It's here in the US. Lifeline phones are available to low-income individuals and they're there to meet essential communication needs. They're there because the government recognizes that in order to pay our bills, get vaccinated, pursue a job, pursue an education, communicate, take charge of our health and safety, we need to have a certain amount of internet connectivity and we need to have phones. And so Lifeline provides these phones to folks that need them, that are living under the poverty line. And I work in a library where a lot of the folks we see are customers with Lifeline phones, and frequently people who are blind or visually impaired will come in with those Lifeline phones. Frontline customer service workers for the companies that issue these phones often don't know which of these phones is accessible. One particular line of these phones, which is capable of running the TalkBack screen reader on Android, we found out is shipped with TalkBack removed, rendering it unusable to a blind customer. And we found out that when customers contact support, support workers routinely claim to customers that this phone is not accessible, even though we found out that TalkBack can easily be reinstalled. So this is not probably a case of malicious intent. We can't know what happened. If I were to guess, TalkBack was removed with a lot of other non-essential services, or what were considered to be non-essential services, in order to save space on the phone. Then the phone was shipped out with that image en masse to customers. And frontline workers were never instructed in the use of a removed feature. And so a feature that's not present on the phone that the frontline worker has seems to be absent from the customer's phone. And so the frontline worker is going to say, this is inaccessible. TalkBack's not supported. The decision not to educate workers about accessibility creates a dark pattern where an individual is told incorrectly that they're not going to be able to use their phone. And I guarantee you, for every 3 or 4 people that we see coming into the library who we're able to educate about reinstalling TalkBack, there's probably dozens who don't have a community center, a community library that's educated about accessibility, who are going to accept that their phone is beyond reach for their accessibility needs. All right, let's head to the next slide. All right, I'd like to talk to you now about automated screen reader detection. So screen reader detection does exactly what it says. And I'm going to talk about the instance on iOS. There are other technical considerations for other operating systems. I'm going to talk about iOS today because I understand it well. And a lot of blind people, I would say perhaps a majority of blind people who are heavily online, use iOS. So screen reader detection is a mechanism in the iOS operating system that alerts an app when a user is running a screen reader. It does not alert the user that this disclosure is happening, and it allows the app to serve the user something different based on screen reader status. So it can be used for benign reasons. For example, I use an app called Voice Dream Reader. It's a really great audiobook and PDF management app. And the first time that I open it, if it notices that I'm using a screen reader, it pops up a tutorial and it gives me some hints specific to my screen reader, since the way that I use gestures are different. I use another app for audio recording, for note taking, called Just Press Record, and it does the same thing. It says, hey, we noticed that you're using a screen reader. Here are some gestures that you can take advantage of. And that seems like a good thing. I feel seen, I feel recognized, I'm getting some information that would probably bog down the average sighted user, but it's information that's really valuable to me. However, screen reader detection as it's implemented on iOS doesn't allow the user to allow or decline one of these divergent paths. So you either opt into it and you go where you're sent, or you opt out. The majority of users never will opt out though, because the opt-out is buried in settings, and the default is to opt-in. So I want to talk to you about a couple instances where screen reader detection was used in an unethical, almost a weaponized way. So several years ago, I was getting ready to teach the Amazon Alexa app to my library patrons. And I had prepped, I had practiced a lot with Amazon Alexa the week before. I had made my outline, and I was ready to present on Amazon Alexa to my library group. And I opened the Amazon app, and the Alexa button was absolutely gone. Couldn't find it anywhere. I closed the app, I reloaded it, my button was still gone. I confirmed that I had the most up-to-date version of the app, still gone. Now, someone else at that table, one of my library patrons, opened her Amazon Alexa app, and her Alexa button was still there. Now, she was someone who was using magnification and not voiceover. So after some testing, the user community figured out that 2 tests were being run. When you first started the Amazon Alexa app, if you were running a screen reader, the Amazon Alexa button would disappear. If you turned off the screen reader and then started the Alexa app, and then turned your screen reader back on, you'd find the Alexa button. But when you tried to activate it, it would go back to classic voice search because it was checking again for the presence of a screen reader. We blogged about this, we reported it, we never got an explanation or an apology. It was quietly changed back up a couple weeks later. What we think may have happened is that a coder wrongly thought that Alexa, text to voice, and voiceover did a similar thing. We'll never know for sure. But what we do know is that blind users for a time were served a subprime alternative experience and didn't have a way to opt out of it. More recently, in I believe early 2020, Facebook hid its entire avatar creator from voiceover users by using the same screen reader detection. Again, this went on for a couple of weeks. We never got confirmation on why it was done. The prevailing theory is that the coder had not made the avatar picker fully accessible yet and wanted to kind of hide it away from voiceover users. We don't know why it happened, but we do know that a subprime, separate, unequal experience was served when screen reader detection was used for serving divergent content. Onward, next slide. I want to talk about accessibility plugins. Sometimes they're called accessibility overlays. So these are third-party, for-profit tools that you can install on your website. A few of them are AudioEye, UserWay, and Accessibe. They're marketed as one-click compliance. You can make your site accessible with 1 line of code. They're marketed as effortless, and a lot of the marketing language centers around protection from litigation, protection from lawsuits. These third-party overlays use screen reader detection, or sometimes they put an element at the top that's only visible to screen readers that says, click this to get into accessibility mode. So if they're not using automated screen reader detection, they'll use user clicks to alter a website for a particular user. So that alteration is not happening on the server side, it's happening in the browser on the user side. These are typically incompatible with some browsers. So they may only work for Firefox or Chrome. They may only work for desktop. They may not work for Safari or for mobile. And they don't make alterations to their customers' websites natively. So native accessibility is not being served. On top of that, most blind and disabled users report that these overlays are actually intrusive and ineffective. So for example, I was informed this week, Accessibe has been doing a lot of aggressive marketing. They've just gotten $40 million in VC funding. And a friend of mine was visiting Namecheap to register their domain this week. And they informed me that the Accessibe interface repeatedly requested them to press Alt+1 to get into accessibility mode. And then when they did that, they were sort of trapped in the overlay modal and unable to interact with other parts of the website. And they actually had to block Accessibe's domains in order to complete their transaction. When you run the results of Accessibe and other overlays alterations through a web content accessibility guidelines checker, they do not conform, they do not comply, so they actually don't prevent litigation. In fact, there are 3 lawsuits going on right now involving Accessibility and several others involving other overlay programs. What's more, they don't build core competency in accessible practices for customers who use them. If you subscribe to an overlay, you have the dubious benefits of that overlay for as long as you subscribe to it. When you stop paying, you stop receiving whatever level of accessibility the tool, the overlay provides, and you haven't changed your accessibility culture in your company. You haven't developed proficiency among your coders and designers in accessible practices, and you're right where you started. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to talk specifically about automated image descriptions. In particular, overlays like Accessibility kind of make a brag that they use AI to create accurate, elaborate image descriptions. They claim that they create equity when dealing with images on the web. Facebook has been using similar auto-generated descriptions since 2016, so for about 5 years now. And during that time, Facebook has received wide and positive coverage in the mainstream press in outlets like TechCrunch and Wired and The Verge. But the reality is much different. When the average blind person goes onto Facebook and comes across an image, maybe it's an image of a friend's wedding, it may say something like, image may contain water and shoes. In fact, the artist and scholar Leo Zalmanson's exhibition from about 2 years ago called Image May Contain contrasts historical photos, such as the return of fallen Vietnam soldiers, with Facebook's captions for those photos, which in the case of fallen Vietnam soldiers, simply said, image may contain a person and a flag. Marketers and PR people who tout the benefits of tools like this are not doing it for our benefit. We disabled people are not the primary audience. They're trying to capitalize on the goodwill of able-bodied people who will believe that any innovation, any development to make things more accessible is inherently liberatory and good, even if the accessibility provided is not truly useful, wanted, or equitable. Cited people who believe companies marketing AI description might not be motivated. Cited people who believe companies, when they market their AI descriptions, may not be motivated to write meaningful descriptions. So in other words, if you know that Facebook, quote unquote, allows image descriptions to happen automatically, or if you're paying a lot of money every month for Accessibility to tell you that it's taking care of all of those images for you, you're not going to learn the art of alt text. And it is an art. If you're showing a statistic, if you're showing an infographic or a chart or anything with emotional valence, if your graphic is instructional in nature or if it has a story to tell, there needs to be a human in the loop. Perhaps in 10 or 15 years, AI may be able to do some of these lifts, but for now, creating meaningful alt text is an art, and it's an art that people will abandon if they mistakenly believe that AI has it under control. Sticking with Facebook for a while, and we'll go to the next slide. In 2019, after ProPublica reported on it, the Department of Housing and Urban Development sued Facebook for allowing advertisers to exclude protected groups of people from viewing ads. One moment. So you may have heard about this, you probably did at the time. The filters included gender and ethnicity and micro-targeted neighborhoods that could give rise to things like digital redlining. But what you may not know is that the filters included people interested in accessibility and wheelchair ramps. Those folks were filtered out in particular from ads for housing. We're becoming increasingly online, increasingly social, increasingly transparent. As we disclose more of our identities to the digital commons, we run a greater and greater risk for discrimination, and we provide a bigger and bigger target and an opportunity for bad actors who can use the ways that we identify to target us for inclusion and exclusion that's not in our interest. Going back to screen reader detection, we haven't found an instance where this has happened yet, but screen reader detection could theoretically be used to block information related to jobs, housing, educational opportunities, and really anything else. All right, heading to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about visual interpreter apps. Blind people use these apps to connect to remote volunteers or gig workers who can look through our cameras and describe any visual scene. So let me tell you a little bit about what that means to me. It might mean going to a farmer's market and not having to get real up close to each stall and say, "What do you have here?" "Oh, no, thank you." It might mean going into a store and choosing the outfit that I want to wear. It might mean steering a boat in a lake. That's happened. Or again, I use a visual interpreter to go online and learn origami models by having them describe what's happening in the video, and then I write down the text-based instructions. I use my visual interpreter on the job. I use a visual interpreter to help me find the place to sign documents, to help read the inaccessible controls on my office copier and my 3D printer. I use it to pick out presents for loved ones. It's a pretty integrated part of my life, and it sees a lot of my life 24/7. Other folks have relationships with visual interpreters that are just as close or closer. To use some of these apps, though, we have to consent to have our audio, video, and metadata recorded. It's stored anywhere from 6 months to indefinitely, and it's used for any commercial purpose according to the terms of service of one of these apps. We did a lot of community advocacy with one of these apps, which is called IRA. They are, by the way, for-profit companies. And they developed a mechanism for users to opt out of recording our audio and our video. But the opt-out happens on the agent side, the person that we're working with. We say, please desist from recording, and we have to trust that it's being done. The cessation of recording isn't observable or verifiable by the user, and it's never in marketing. It's never pointed out during onboarding. The company would prefer to keep our data, and it is a pretty well-kept secret that you have the ability to opt out. The information is there in terms of service, but the company and the app do nothing to construct a moment of meaningful consent. Next slide, please. So a couple weeks ago, I received an invitation to Clubhouse, and I was excited. I'm, never above getting in on a little bit of buzz and getting a little excited about the next social media phenomenon. But from its inception, I found out that audio social media app Clubhouse has been nearly unusable to blind users of VoiceOver since it started last fall or last summer. Around the time that I joined, a lot of community advocacy in the blind community was happening via LinkedIn, via the Clubhouse app itself, via feedback channels. And a substantial update came out in early February that labeled the unlabeled buttons and classed some elements properly and gave VoiceOver users, I would say 85% accessibility to the platform. And so blind people are now swarming to the platform. But here's what we have to reckon with, and what all users have to reckon with. Deaf users are still excluded from the platform. The developers say that captions are on the roadmap, quote unquote, eventually, but the captions aren't there now. So those of us who can be present, who can make it into the app, and who can interact, have to make a really tough decision. Do we remove ourselves from the app because it's a segregated space? Do we insert ourselves into the app and try to bring deaf people with us by finding third-party workarounds for deaf participation? Some folks are saying that they can use Google Meet and other third-party kind of blended captions to get access to Clubhouse, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly how they're doing it. Or do we allow ourselves to occupy that space, promote that space, and grow the user base when we know it to be a segregated space? Most folks would not think of a missing accessibility feature as a dark pattern, but I wonder, isn't it a dark pattern if you are encouraging your users with dominant abilities to enjoy, promote, and grow a space in the full knowledge that that space is segregated in some way? Next slide. So digital frictions don't always rise to the level of dark patterns as I conceive them, and they don't even always rise to the level of keeping us out. But digital frictions also occur when apps and software, hardware fail to play to our strengths. So for example, often blind and disabled people are able to process text-to-speech at a very rapid rate. This is because we've been using screen readers in some cases for years or all our lives. Many of us can read 600 words per minute or faster with synthesized speech. We're very good audio information processors. We have to be. So when we try to use Siri or other voice assistants that don't speed up, that becomes really tedious. So tedious that it might discourage some of us from even trying to use the tool. In another case that affects blind people and deaf people, we can't opt out of streaming the video portion of audiovisual content. And conversely, deaf people can't opt out of the audio track. So we have to use screen space, screen real estate for video content. And more importantly, we have to use data bandwidth. We have to use energy. We have to enlarge our carbon footprint to make room for content that we literally cannot use. Next slide. Sometimes the accessibility is there, but it's not there by default. Often interfaces allow content creators to use alt text to describe images, but they don't automatically prompt users to do so. And some even hide the option by default. Until mid-2020, if you wanted to add alt text or alternative text to a Twitter image, you had to go deep into your settings and find an opt-in, and then the alt text field would appear to you. We did some advocacy around that because only 1 in 100 images was being described, and the option is now visible to all users. But here's the thing, it's still not a required field. And we've all been filling out a lot of fields in forums and on Zoom this year. You know what happens when a field's not required. If you're not compelled to fill it and it's not in your immediate interest, you're probably not going to stop and fill that field. So creating an accessibility option that's not available by default and that's not required kind of legitimizes the choice that you may not want to make something accessible. All right, next slide. I want to circle back to this concept of when is something a digital friction and when is it a dark pattern? In some of the cases we've looked at tonight, malicious intent is clear or probable. The folks marketing Accessibility and other overlays are clearly engaged in deceptive marketing, for example. Housing discrimination is clearly happening when you filter out people who are interested in accessibility or wheelchair ramps. In many cases, though, harm to the user arose from not thinking about, not considering, or prioritizing blind and disabled users, or maybe just misunderstanding those users. So I think it becomes difficult to define a dark pattern that entraps, limits, or excludes a user, as everything we looked at does tonight, in terms of what a developer intended. Users can experience the intense effects of a dark pattern regardless of the experience that they were intended to have, if intention was even directed their way at all. Next slide, please. I want to talk about some ways that we can give dark patterns nowhere to hide. Digital frictions and dark patterns affecting disabled people are going to flourish when there aren't practices to actively notice, call out, and eliminate them. We need developers and designers to hire disabled talent, get people in internship programs, get people in as fellows, get them into the pipeline, and then promote them. And include user testing with disabled people throughout the development process. It's easy enough to send out a recruitment email, get in touch with communities of disability. There are Facebook groups, there are civil rights organizations, pay an honorarium, get user testers in, listen to tester feedback. Content management systems and development tools need to treat inaccessible content more like they treat errors in spelling or grammar, something you must want to fix. Always show the error with a workflow that expects the error to be resolved, not to be abandoned in its error state. Accessibility teams within companies need to be empowered to do more than advise. I've heard that Facebook and other social media companies have accessibility teams that identify accessibility issues in a timely manner, but they can't stop accessibility issues from rolling out. These teams must be resourced, sufficiently staffed, and have the power to block inaccessible releases from shipping. Next slide. Journalists have a role to play. Mainstream journalists often play a pivotal role in promoting accessibility innovations, especially around CES time, other major conference times, but it really happens all year, that may be minimally useful or actually cause harm. Journalists need to be really conscious of whether they're reporting on something that they cannot experience directly. They must approach stories on disability technology with the same skepticism, rigor, and research that they would allocate to other topics in tech, like data ethics and security. They need to realize that in disability technology too, stakeholders have differing perspectives, and the developer perspective is not the only one. For great reporting on accessible technology, media organizations need to hire disabled journalists who can tell our own stories. Next slide. Decision makers in organizations often procure technology because its developers claim it's accessible. The marketing copy looks good. Other companies are using it. Claims of accessibility need to be tested and vetted, just like other types of claims. Deceptive marketing often makes false claims about accessibility, as we've seen, or leaves out critical information about missing features or cases where access is less than equitable. If you procure technology and it turns out to be inaccessible, you lose out on the productivity of your students and your employees, and you may be subject to litigation. Procurement policies that have specific standards for accessibility and that include meaningful consequences for vendors that don't deliver what they say they can help, but there's no substitute for rigorously testing a vendor's claims and never believing accessibility based on what the marketing says. And lastly, last slide, the role of allies. Everyone here tonight, there are things that we can do. We can call out inaccessibility when we see it in our organization, whether it's software, a process, a procedure, something that's about to be approved without an access check. We can contest the presence of segregated spaces like Clubhouse and continue to file feedback and continue to be vocal about who's excluded from the room that we are in, whether it's an analog or a digital room. We can question workflows that encourage making the inaccessible choice. So if we see a CMS where alt text isn't required, we can ask why. And we can document inaccessibility, write it up, write blog posts, use social media, write to developers, lift up the priority of accessibility by making it a more common part of the conversation, a bigger part of the discourse. And remember disability when you think about how implicit bias shapes a technology or a process. Connect with us, ask people about their experiences as assistive technology users, and above all, believe users when they report inaccessibility, and do what you can to amplify our voices and our stories so that we can build a more equitable digital commons. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chancey, for that wonderful presentation. I really appreciated it. To everyone in our audience who's attending, I want to encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A box. We will try to get to as many questions as we can. We will only say your first name, or if you want to be anonymous, you can say anonymous. So I think I'll get us started with questions. We have a question from Adam, who writes, thinking about developing advocacy toolkits for blind students in the K-12 system. Are there any consultative skills or strategies that students should work on when in school so they are well prepared to engage in user testing and feedback?
Yes, that's a great question, Adam. So I think taking a granular approach to reporting things. So the formula that I like to use is, if you're encountering an accessibility problem, what were you attempting to achieve? What steps did you perform? What did you expect to happen? And then what happened instead? And write that up. And of course, students also need to be encouraged to talk about what interaction of products they were using, what software version, what screen reader, were they using a braille display, etc. And then students need to learn to look for the right channels to submit feedback. I will say though, that's a skill that we've all got to develop, and it's an important advocacy skill, but there's also some room for not having a student do that labor every single time. A lot of us who are in college or early career report that dealing with accessibility feels like a second full-time job. And so there's a balance between teaching those advocacy skills and making sure that students have them, and maybe giving students additional support sometimes once they've mastered those skills, so that they're not having an uncredited shadow course in troubleshooting digital accessibility.
Thank you so much. Also, forgive the snow clearing sounds in the background.
No worries.
So yeah, again, I encourage people to ask questions in the Q&A box. In the meantime, I have a question regarding the screen reader disclosure that you talked about. And I was wondering if you could speak to if there are any ways that screen readers could be sensed by the system so that the positive features that you said about where, like with the reading app, where certain features are made available when screen readers are detected, so that those positive features can still be detected, or those positive features might be available when detected without the risk of kind of bad actors using screen reader detection in order for housing discrimination. Is there any way that, can you speak to if there's any ways to mitigate some of those harmful effects?
Maybe if the flow is more like the way that we handle location, microphone, camera, this app would like to know if you're using a screen reader. Would you like to tell it? And you can make a decision based on the app if you trust the app or not. Do I trust Voice Dream Reader? Absolutely. Do I trust Facebook? Not at all. There still is some room for user education there, and individual assessments of their privacy exposures. But I think having a more granular approach where it's not just one opt-in or opt-out in voiceover settings, but instead you get to make a decision about consenting to what you tell each individual app, that might help.
Fantastic, thank you. So again, I'm encouraging people to ask questions in the Q&A box. And also Mira, if you have a question you would like to ask. For people that are interested in learning more about accessible technologies and the dark patterns in them, do you have any resources that you might suggest for further reading or self-education in order to become better allies?
I think accessibility Twitter is really great. We use a hashtag often A11Y, which is A 11 letters and then Y. And the accessibility Twitter community is really strong. There are a lot of A11Y meetups throughout the country that you can join. There's an A11Y NYC, A11Y Bay. I think it's also really important to get to know communities of disability ourselves. So I'm a member of the National Federation of the Blind, which is a civil rights organization that's been around since 1940. And we have local chapters. We also have a computer science and a science and engineering division. Getting to know our civil rights organizations and our priorities, I think, is a powerful thing to do. And then just engaging with your colleagues and folks who are in your circles who have disabilities, who might have priorities. I think starting these conversations cross disability and outside the disability bubble is really important. I think if you work in, if you're writing, if you're a writer, if you're a journalist, and you want to help amplify our voices and help tell these stories, because a lot of the kind of shady work that goes on and the deprioritization and the marginalization of our communities goes on, it happens because we are an insular, not an insular community, but we all know what's going on inside our community. And sometimes we need help boosting the story outside our bubble so that improvement actually happens.
Fantastic, thank you. An anonymous attendee asks, first of all, says awesome presentation, thanks you, and asks, what are the best ways for our user UX designers to test for A11Y if we have limited resources for user testing and devs specializing in A11Y?
If you head over to WebAIM, which is Web Accessibility in Mind, but webaim.org, they have a lot of articles that could probably help get you started. There are automated accessibility checkers that will find the most obvious things, but there's no substitute for user testing. You've really got to budget for some user testing. You do have the ability to learn to use a screen reader and get proficient with a screen reader yourself, whether it be NVDA, which is a free, powerful screen reader for Windows, or VoiceOver, which works on Mac and iOS. But if you're going to do that, as a person who's sighted, make sure you're able to run that screen reader well enough that you could put a t-shirt over the screen and still navigate an accessible website. Sighted bias is really hard to rule out. And a similar thing is true if you're testing voice control. Don't allow yourself to use the keyboard. If you're testing switch control, don't allow yourself to use the keyboard or the mouse. And really, you can reduce the need for user testing maybe, but I don't think you can ever quite make it go away. And I think it's hard for me to give you an answer that isn't do user testing anyway.
Thank you. Mira, did you want to read the next question?
Yeah, and an anonymous attendee asks, are there examples of tech companies that do make accessibility as the default of their products?
So there are a lot of companies that have done significant work in accessibility in the last few years. Google has made G Suite really accessible. Microsoft has a demonstrated commitment to accessibility, and Microsoft has developed for Office an accessibility checker that very much does run sort of a spell check, analogous to spell check process over documents, and flags any kind of content, any kind of image that's inaccessible and suggests remediation. And it's not something that you have to use. And so it's still not a default, but it at least is a proactive tool that can be deployed at the organizational level, and we can have the expectation that you'll use it. So there are organizations that are moving in the right direction. Twitter, at least surfacing the field for all users, is progress. Drupal installations that surface the field for all users represent progress, but nothing in the space is perfect.
Tani or Tani asks, excuse me, possible mispronunciation. They ask, or she asks, I was really interested in the inability to make Siri read faster. Are there other apps where that is a problem, or are they mostly read by your own device reader?
Yeah, so because you know, you probably have a favorite font, right? Most of us prefer to use the text to speech engine at the speed that we prefer to use it. You know, I have my Alex voice on my iPhone. I have a very old voice called Eloquence on Windows that I've been using since probably 2000, because that's just what my brain understands. Alexa will, and I'm sorry if I triggered that for anyone, Alexa will definitely speed up, and some voice assistants have that ability, but Google Assistant doesn't, Siri doesn't. I don't think that the C lady, she'll come up. I don't think the Microsoft Assistant does. And it's just a case where processing information differently hasn't been taken into account, and it's not making something accessible exactly. It's playing to a strength that we have because of other accessibility tools that we use, and that, unless you have blind and disabled people on your dev team, that's probably not even a thought.
Adam is asking, are you aware of any online sources, blogs, Twitter accounts, etc., that highlight the effective impacts of inaccessibility that blind users experience? Essentially, going beyond understanding the functional impacts of inaccessibility to understand, communicate impacts to lived experiences. P.S. Other than your incredible and eminently retweetable account, Chancey.
I think I know who that Adam is. There are definitely blogs out there and YouTube channels. I don't think I have anything at the moment that I can cite in particular, but I'll know it when I see it, and I'll tweet it again when I see it. I don't think there's one source, one site where those things are aggregated, but there are user stories all over social media and all over the web. I think we tend to see more affective user stories on social media because that's where we go to vent. That's where we go when we're out of energy. When I've come up against an inaccessible technology and I'm segregated out, I'm probably not going to sit down and write a well-formatted blog post about it. I'm probably just going to find my favorite social media outlet and just let it out a little bit. So I think that affective range is probably more common on social media and less less on blogs, because that's just not where we go when we're upset.
Sandra has a comment that I'll read part of it, and I think that'll lead to another question. So Sandra writes, I appreciated the critique of software that markets itself as a replacement for good accessibility practices and having a culture supportive and understanding of why accessibility is important. Faculty suggest that such tools can be used in course development in the organization Sandra works in, but they remain unconvinced as based off of some of what they've heard from your talk today, and that they're more convinced by the importance of human testers and reviewers and their essential place. So they thank you for this. And I think this leads into a question around kind of accessibility in educational technologies. And I'm wondering, with this year during the pandemic, so many classrooms have moved into online settings. And if you have seen how maybe conversations have started to shift around accessibility technology, particularly around educational technologies.
So yeah, a few things have happened. I want to call out that a lot of people with chronic illness and invisible disabilities, physical disabilities, have said that they've been asking for virtual learning for years and years. And this is the year that they got it because non-disabled people needed it. So that's a little bit outside my wheelhouse, but like very obvious. And they're hoping to maintain this gain, and they're hoping not to be told when we go back to whatever normal is that virtual learning is out again. In my community, blind parents have been supporting their kids on all kinds of remote learning tools. A lot of those tools were inaccessible before, but now the import of that is just magnified because the parent has to be the de facto teacher and has to be the primary support person for the student. Same thing for students who are blind, dealing with inaccessible tools. Before, they may have had a resource person in school making things, kind of building a bridge to accessibility when the software itself wasn't accessible. And so there's been kind of an outcry and a demand for educational technology to be more accessible and for schools to stop procuring inaccessible technology. Last year, blind students were initially told that they would not be able to take their AP tests in Braille. The test is administered online, but components of it are traditionally in hard copy Braille, and the College Board said that they couldn't issue Braille hard copy to the students. And I believe the students, I don't know if it made it to a lawsuit, I believe it did make it to a suit, and the students won the right to get their hard copy Braille as part of their AP exams. That was a big thing. Another thing we've seen on the rise is remote proctoring. And if you've noticed, my eyes kind of go wherever they want. And so remote proctoring looks at eye gaze, for one thing, eye contact, whether you're looking away from the screen, and it also looks at whether you're moving around. Maybe a student has to kind of get up and take a bio break. So there's a big conversation being had about remote proctoring being inherently sort of ableist and having disproportionately harmful impacts on people from communities of disability.
Kai Sheen, forgive me if I mispronounced that, wants to thank you for your insight and lived experiences. And Tawny has another question. She is asking, for people who design professional development for educators, can you think of ways we might encourage educators to engage more heavily in supporting disabled youth in tech?
What I find motivating is hearing from people who are disabled, blind, deaf, going into tech, going into STEM. And the areas where I've been able to make change, able to get a developer of educational technology to care, it's been because of personal stories. So I think connecting folks with the people they're impacting and raising up the voices of disabled people that want to participate is probably the most effective way. We can talk about compliance, we can talk about the law, and it's not always as effective as talking about individual stories. That being said, if you have the power to procure or say no to procuring a technology, and you say loud and proud in your RFP, in your statement of intent, that you're only going to acquire accessible technologies. As Jim Fruchterman says, Benetech, procurement is one of the most powerful hammer, or not hammer, procurement's one of the most powerful levers that we have to change the landscape of accessible technology. If everyone tomorrow started mandating accessibility for anything that they procure, the field would have to shift a lot faster than it's shifting now.
Thank you. So again, I want to encourage people, if you're able to use the Q&A box or message us if for accessibility reasons you can't, just because we've had issues with Zoom bombing and other forms of harassment. So that's why we don't have the mics on for questions. And we're sorry about that barrier. But so Sandra asks, and I think this question also can be expanded. So Sandra asks about how users view platforms like Mobius that are specifically for STEM content. Sandra says it seems accessible and usable by screen readers, but doesn't know how users perceive it. And I think maybe to also kind of expand that question too is there, would it just be from blogs, or how can people who don't have certain disabilities, able-bodied users, find out about technologies that might produce barriers for other users if they want to be a good ally?
I would start by Googling the technology in question and the word accessibility. If there is no accessibility statement, that's probably a bad sign. If there is an accessibility statement, read it and look at how they operationalize. What does accessibility mean to them? What kind of screen reader support and low vision support and other disability support do they offer? And then if it passes those checks, you know, it's time to check with the actual community, check with users. Usually there are user forums, there are people posting about their experiences of whether or not something was accessible. It's particularly easy for iOS apps. You can go to this website called applevis.com, and folks review apps in terms of accessibility. It's not that easy for web apps or Windows apps. You basically have to do a lot of Googling around and sometimes diving into Facebook groups. It can't always be the easiest thing to find, but if the tool is partially accessible or fully accessible, there usually is something written up about it somewhere. And if it's inaccessible, there's usually some forums of people trying and failing to use the tool.
Thank you so much. Mira, do you want to ask the last question? I think this will be the last question, and yeah.
An anonymous attendee asks, do you have recommendations for canonical books or articles on disability, accessibility, or technology?
Let's see, I'm going to recommend a book by, I hope I'm getting the name right, Sarah Hendren, What Can a Body Do? And it's a recent book that invites us to re-examine the relationship between our bodies and the built environment and think about design in terms of accommodating all different kinds of abilities and disabilities. And I'm going to recommend a book a few years old by Kel Smith called Digital Outcasts that looks specifically at disability and the digital divide. I've also been reading, and this is not a disability specific book, but it's helped me frame my thoughts about disability and technology in a new way. I'm reading How Artifacts Afford by Jenny L. Davis and looking at her mechanisms and conditions framework to kind of parse out whether technologies demand, expect, discourage, or refuse certain actions that disabled people can take and how we can fit our interaction into the broader conversation about design and affordances.
Thank you so much for sharing those resources, and thank you so much for your presentation today. I want to thank our captionist, Kelly, for captioning today's event, and I want to thank everyone for attending. We hope we get to enjoy future presentations with you. All of our events are free, virtual, and professionally live captioned, and recordings will be made available on the website usually within about a week. So thank you so much, Chancey, for joining us today, and thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
great
It's been a
evening.
pleasure. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.